Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Breakthrough, a show about mastering the mindsets of success. This show is very proudly brought to you by Leaderonomics and Opeaklife. My name is Lisa Wong. I'm a transformation coach at Opeaklife and Mindvalley and a former anchor at ESPN. It's my vision to bring to you the stories of successful individuals and deep dive into how they build themselves to become the person they are, so you're inspired and committed to live your best life personally and professionally. Today, we're going to be having a very interesting conversation. And before I bring on my guest, I want to ask you this. We have heard how stories build connection with people, regardless if you're in a job interview or a speaker on stage or selling a product or your brand. So my question to you is, do you feel like you don't have interesting stories to tell? Or do you feel unnatural, memorize every word and feel like you're not fully present? Fret not, because we have a master storyteller coach in the form of Keith Bailey. And I'd like to read his interesting intro that he sent to me. So this is how my guest describes himself. Personally, Keith moonlights as feline hairstylist. Once a month, he shaves his 2 cats because he loves cats but hates the hair. Professionally, Keith helps prevent business professionals from committing unintentional audience abuse by enhancing your ability to communicate for impact, profit, and fun. Please welcome Keith Bailey. Hi, Keith. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, Lisa. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you. Good. So we're super excited to have you on the show. Now, I just want to kind of set the frame here. In the next 45 minutes, I'd like to cover 2 important areas with you, Keith. Now, first of all is how to craft a good story for impact and influence, and how to approach networking events as a game and talking more than just the weather.
Yeah.
So that's cool. That's cool by you?
We're going to talk about 2 of my favorite things. Yes.
Great.
Unless you wanted to go down the rabbit hole, we could talk about cat shaving for about the next hour as well, because there is an art and a science to it.
I know that. I know that you have a video to share, so we will share that with the audience later. That's a YouTube video on how Keith teaches how to shave cat's hair. So that's it's the first time I'm hearing this, Keith. But yes. So much to learn from you. And I'm going to ask you this firstly. What led to coaching others in storytelling?
I've had a coaching mindset. I've had a coaching business that was outside of the story coaching aspect for about 8 years. It was actually one of my first entrepreneurial businesses. And I really fell in love with the transformation and being able to reach out and touch and positively impact somebody's life. And when my training business defaulted in 2008, I went back into corporate sales, and I moved up through the ranks, and I quickly moved into a global sales position for a legacy corporation. And I was with them for about 4 years. And for a year and a half of that, we didn't have a president. We were this massive legacy corporation, just like a giant ship, just untethered on the wild seas of commerce. And we were kind of a ship without a captain, without a North Star. And we had a new president that was coming on board. And I remember the day I'm standing in front of all of our employees as part of the legacy team, leadership team, and the new president steps forth. And it's his chance to really galvanize everybody and bring everybody together and point us towards that North Star. And he steps out, and I know stepping in front of a large group of people that you don't know, and they're right there in front of you, is nerve-wracking. I don't care how seasoned of a speaker you are, it is daunting. And he steps out, and he's got his note card with him, and then he starts to visibly shake, and then he starts to stammer and and to ah, and he loses track of where he's supposed to be and kind of goes off topic, and he never gets to the point. And at that moment, he lost the audience. He lost the opportunity to really bring everybody together. And in that moment, I had a realization that unintentional audience abuse is completely preventable. Speakers are not born, right? They're made. And if speaking is something that you need to do, then you need to put yourself into a state of practice, or you do what a lot of professional athletes do, is they hire a coach. And in that moment, my path was clear. I needed to leave corporate America and work with business professionals to ensure that this never happens to them.
Wow. Okay. So that means also that you have had the skills or at least the experience, right, to be able to coach. So how did you gather that? And I also know that there was a moment during fourth grade.
Yep.
Yes, something happened. Can you share?
It's one of my favorite stories to tell. I'd love to share this story. Yeah, I had a seminal moment in fourth grade. At this point, I'd lived in the United States for 1 year. I'm originally from Holland. And I didn't speak the language when I came here. I knew yes and no. And now, many years later, I know all the swear words, which I see as progress. And a year into school, an elementary school is brutal. Kids pick on you for no reason, but they had reason to pick on me because my mother made all of my clothing, which today would be so woke, but back then it was just an area for ridicule. And I was pretty heavily picked on. And I get to fourth grade, and Miss Merrick gave us a book report. We all had to read a book, whoever wanted to read it on, whatever historical figure, and costumes were optional but recommended. And when I shared this with my mom, she's like, "Oh, we'll give him something to talk about." And she made my costume. And I read my book, and I wrote my report on a note card with big, huge letters on it so I could read it. And I remember standing outside the room, and I'm looking in, and it's got that little rectangular pane of glass. And as I'm standing there in my absolutely ridiculous costume, I see one kid like just turn his head, and he makes eye contact with me, and then he starts elbowing the kid next to him. And all of a sudden, all the kids in the room are like trying to get a view of me through this little pane of glass as the other kid was wrapping up his book report. And the whole class just goes into absolute hysteria. And then I open up the door and I step in, and kids were falling out of their desks because I'm standing there, and what I'm wearing is I've got purple tights on. And then I have these gold pumpkin shaped shorts, a tight purple shirt with gold pumpkin shaped epaulets on my shoulder, a big hat with a huge feather in it. And I'm there to give a very winning book report on none other than Christopher Columbus, who by today's standard would be a very controversial topic here in the United States. And while the kids laughed at me through the entire book report, at the end of it, I had really given them something to talk about. But most importantly, unbeknownst to me, my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Merrick, was so moved by this moment that she came over and she took me by the hand, and she took me back to my third grade class, Miss Huddleston, and I delivered the book report to the exact same response. And then after that, she took me to the fourth grade, Mrs. Smart's class. And it's interesting how 1 year of life can really enable a kid to be that much more jeering and to be that much more intense when it comes to making fun of you. But I stood in front of that fourth grade class, and I delivered a book report, and I learned several things there. One, you're never going to die giving a speech unless you have a heart attack. Two, the haters will hate, and there's nothing you can do to control that. And three, and this is the really important one, those who believe in you will take you by the hand, and they will show you the way. And that was a seminal moment for me, because from there on out, I fell in love with the stage. I fell in love with public speaking and what the power that it has. You have a chance to command an audience. You have a chance to be able to have an impact on that audience. And from there on out, I was never shy. And I spent 8 years in Toastmasters. I always stepped up to learn more. I've always just enjoyed that speaking portion of it. So when that seminal moment came about, I was like, I can help. I know that I have the tools, I have the know-how. I need to start a business to figure out how it is I can best help other business professionals from committing that unintentional audience abuse. And I want to be clear on something real quick here, Lisa, is I say unintentional audience abuse, and I'm very specific about that. It's unintentional because they don't mean to, right? If I didn't say unintentional, then it could be premeditated. But people don't mean to abuse their audiences. But when you and ah, that's just a simple one. There's nothing really too malicious about that. But it's when you put up that PowerPoint, you start reading every word that you have on that PowerPoint. You turn your back to the audience, right? Those are some of the blatant forms of unintentional audience abuse.
Okay, wonderful. So that's a story from fourth grade. Now moving on, like you had that stage to really garner the experience. Beyond that, what was it? Toastmaster immediately, and then into corporate America. How did it go by?
So after I finished high school and I went into the Marine Corps for a period of time, which is a wonderful thing because it lifts you up, it gives you so much confidence that you can feel you can do anything, right? The whole mindset of improvise, adapt, overcome. There's always a solution to that. And then from there, I majored in the hospitality industry, the restaurant business, which is in the most inhospitable industry in the world. And if we think of life, and I do think of life in the Shakespearean way, right, that all the world is a stage, and how you show up for that stage is a direct reflection of your personal professional brand. So in the restaurant industry, it was leading servers and bartenders and kitchen staff. It was also, putting your best foot forward when you're connecting with the patrons that are coming in. Because there's something that restaurant owners know, is that the client who comes in one time, you really don't make any money on them and your restaurant is not sustainable. It's when they come back time and time again and they become a regular and then they start bringing their friends. That's how you become successful as a restaurant. And we've all gone out to eat. It's a very common thing. We've been to restaurants that have the best food and the worst service. You're not going to go back. You're going to go to a restaurant that has consistent food and great service. That's your go-to. And that service is because of the experience that the entire restaurant is creating for you. And that is a stage. So I spent a long time in the restaurant business, really cutting my teeth on speaking and presenting and being persuasive. Because a really good server is able to get you to order things off menu or get you to order things that you weren't planning on ordering. And then after that, I took a break. I became a snowboard bum for a while, which was the best thing I've ever done for myself, besides obviously starting this business. And then I came back and I started a personal training business, and I absolutely love that. And that is a whole nother stage, right? You have to articulate the instructions of exercise and you have to motivate people. And the big lesson there that also applies here is that exercise, along with any kind of coaching you do, it's 80% mental, it's 20%, in personal training, the actual picking up of the weights. And it's the same thing with what I do here. 80% of what I do is a mental reprogramming of how it is that you look at your life's experiences, past and present, and how can we change this to start looking at your life through the lens of a storyteller? Because it's your story. You have a chance to be able to craft it and create it however you want, and then be able to attach that message and that meaning that resonates to the listener. And that is 80% mental, and then you gotta get in the reps. Right? The story I shared with everybody here today, I've shared two stories, one about a seminal moment in the fourth grade and one about a moment in time where I realized my current path. And I set those up very specifically. And there's a formula or a template that I follow in my storytelling process that is really specific, concise, memorable, and repeatable.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we'll get more into that. I just want to say a big hi to Roshan, to Shashiwex, to Wakshat. Yes, Roshan, loving the show, thank you. And also to Waksat. Now, he's got a question for you, Keith. He says, hey, Keith, very curious, how did you see storytelling before you embarked on your professional career, and what changed?
It's interesting. I've always loved stories. I've always loved listening to stories. I've always liked telling stories. The thing that really changed, it's like if you have a passion for cars, and the cars that you get, all the details about them, and you buy them for very specific reasons, and you like to drive them, and you see other cars and you appreciate all of those cars. Well, that's on a surface level. And then once you really get into it, you're like, oh, now it's time to become a mechanic. And as a mechanic, you learn how that car works inside out. Every nut, bolt, washer, you know how that thing works. And it's because you've taken the time to really study it and to master it. And I think that's probably the analogy that I would use as to what changed for me. Is I went from having this love and this passion to really diving deep into storytelling. And the reason this came about as a focus for a business is I was working when I left corporate America in fall of 17, I started a different business, which I've now mothballed and turned into this. And in that business, it was called stage coaching. And I started working with business professionals. And what I came to realize is, wow, Everybody has content, facts, figures, and data. And that's what they want to speak to. But we know that that's not how the brain computes information, really remembers things. It's when we place a story with it that we end up speaking to a different portion of the mind where there is no language or no words. It's called the limbic mind. And we tell a story, we're actually speaking directly to the other person's limbic mind, which is, there's a bit of voodoo that I'll get into in just a moment. And then we're able to leap out of there into the neocortex where all of our logic mind is, and we're able to attach those facts and figures. Well, in working with these business professionals, they didn't have the story. So I was out for a bike ride one day because, Lisa, as you know, I'm an avid cyclist. I'm a wrapped around the axle cyclist. And I was out for a bike ride and I had an aha moment, right? Kind of like Einstein did when he thought of the theory of relativity. He was out riding his bike. And I was like, well, what if? What if we just go looking for stories? What if we just focus on looking at those personal experiences and shaping them into the form of a story? And then what if we were to just use one word as the trigger to help people start looking back through the lens, back into their mind's eye, the limbic mind, and really uncovering those experiences? And that was a seminal moment for me as well, a really big aha moment that put me on the trajectory that I'm currently on.
I want to say hi to Anne Lee. Anne Lee is saying hello, Lisa, and hello, Keith. Nice to have you join us, Anne. Anne's from LinkedIn, a LinkedIn user. So, Keith, now, I know that we have heard so much about people saying about stories, and it's a way of connecting us. Perhaps before we dive into the nitty-gritty of, how to do storytelling, why is story so important? How does it connect, and how does it leave an imprint in the minds of the audience?
There's a wonderful quote by Patty Dye, which is, the shortest distance between two people is a story. And it's not just any story. It's a simple story, because what's most common is most universal. We've listened to those inspirational speakers that are astronauts that have gone to outer space, or they've climbed Mount Everest. And while that is all really impressive and we are in awe of them, what's difficult is your ability to relate to them. I'm never going to outer space. I'm no Jeff Bezos. And I have absolutely zero desire to summit Mount Everest. So while those stories are grandiose, they're almost too grandiose. When we tell a really simple story of a time in our lives where something happened, the audience is able to connect. Well, let's take for instance, the fourth grade story, right? What's common about that is we've all been in school, whether we've finished elementary school and gone on. We've all sat in class. We've all had teachers. We've all had kids that were mean to us and that were bullies. We've all been made fun of in one way or another. Which I said, we've all given a book report. I've just given 5 simple things that we all have, that everybody has in common in that simple story. And as I tell that story, and there's a very specific way that I tell that story, what you're able to do as the listener is you actually put yourself in my shoes. And as I tell the story, you're the one that's standing in front of the class. You're the one that's seeing all these kids laughing at you. You're the one who has the teacher take you by the hand and take you somewhere. So when we share these really simple stories, the listener is able to relate to us. And that relating to us is what actually ends up developing a higher level of trust, because you empathize with my plight and with my experience. And then as I take you down that path, I'm leading you in a very specific direction that ends up in the message. And whether you remember the story or the message and then the story, it is very specific, concise, and memorable.
There is this mindset, and it's very common, and I hear it all the time. I'm sure you do too, Keith, but perhaps you can share your experience as a coach. A lot of people think, I'm just a regular person on the street. I'm not Roger Federer. I'm not Keith Bailey. What's my story? Why is it so unique and special? Why do I have to say it? Why do I have to tell you? Or why is it worth sharing? What's your remark? What's your opinion on that, Keith?
I get this a lot. People are like, nothing exciting has ever happened to me. Like, have you lived this thing called life? It's pretty exciting, and your life is your life. It's unique to you. There's a gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek, a huge thought leader, and one of the things that he talks about is people don't buy what you do; they buy why you do what you do. And your story is the why. Right? You asked me, like, Keith, why are you on this path? And I share a story about a moment in time in a corporation that forever changed my life and put me on this path. We all have these experiences. They happen to us on a daily basis. We just brush them off like, well, that's just my boring life, and that's just how things go, right? This is so mundane, it happens to everybody. Well, it happens to a lot of people, but it happened to you. And you have the opportunity to be able to craft that story and remember it the way that you want to remember it, and be able to share it in a way that people can relate to. And that's really where that power of the story comes in. It helps you whether you're a leader, or you need to work on a team to get somebody to see something from your point of view, as opposed to just trying to cram facts and figures, which is run rampant, and everybody has them and nobody can really relate to them because they don't feel anything. When you share a story, you make the listener feel something. And it was funny. I was sitting with a human resource professional, Lisa, and she's like, I'd like for you to work with my leadership team. How do you broach the topic of vulnerability with leaders? And I was like, I don't talk about vulnerability, because as soon as I do, they all shut down. And chances have it's a legacy corporation, and chances have it they're just a bunch of white dudes, and probably old white dudes, that are like, oh no, feelings have nothing to do with work. So I don't talk about, how I broach vulnerability. I just talk about the power of storytelling, because one of the largest things that is consumed on this planet besides food is entertainment. And all that entertainment, all it's doing is telling a story. You at ESPN, right? Let's go back in time. You were reporting on stories. That's what ESPN is. It's just a bunch of stories, and you have a chance to be able to craft that story and deliver it in the way that you see best connects with your listener and your audience. And they're simple stories. They're just simple human beings that have, really focused on one thing a lot and have risen to the top of their game, which brings us to what I want to talk about real quick. There's a direct correlation between a business professional and a professional athlete. There's 1 degree of separation, and this is it. A professional athlete spends more time scrimmaging and reading the playbook than they do playing the actual game. They are in a constant state of practice. So when it comes time to take the field or the pitch or to get on the bike, well, they've just been doing this all along. So if you're a business professional and you have to take life's stage, which means you have to talk to other people, and storytelling and communication is important to you, then you need to find a way to put yourself into a state of constant practice. And the accountability piece to that is great, which is why I joined Toastmasters 8 years ago. And I go every single day. And while most people join an organization like Toastmasters to become a better speaker, what's interesting is the thing that came out of it for me, or that's come out of it for me, I've actually become a better listener. And that is a skill that I think is even more powerful than being a really great storyteller, because we have a tendency to listen to understand. So we have a tendency to listen to reply and not listen to understand. And I think it's Covey who said this. I've got so many quotes rolling around my head. In order to be interesting, it is better to be interested.
I totally agree. Yes. Very nicely said. And I agree with you. Anne says, I feel that storytelling brings language to life and allows us to connect better. Yes. Kesavan Shashi says, powerful. I agree. So tell us, Keith, there is a method that you use to help people get into storytelling. What are the criteria to be able to say a good story?
I had an opportunity to build an e-course during the pandemic. It's one of those beautiful things that happen when your world gets completely rocked and shifted. You get it put into a creative state of trying to solve problems. And I was introduced to a professional career coach by the name of Danielle Rosell. And she has a company called Inner Compass Coach. And while she's on the career coaching side, especially focused on job interviewing, and I'm on the storytelling side, we realized that, well, what is an interview but a series of short stories about your life and your experiences? So let's let's put that to the test on being able to come up with a very strategic and methodical way of being able to tell stories. And what she opened up my eyes to was something that I was already doing, but she opened my eyes up to a story formula called SARM, S-A-R-M. And SARM stands for situation, action, resolution, and then message, meaning, or modification. And if we think about stories in that format, what ends up happening is you really start looking at the foundation of how you tell a good story. And on its foundation, it's really simple. But kind of like that car analogy, once you really want to dive in deep, you realize the layers that are there. But we can get somebody to adopt this and to use this, and they're on their way. So if you think about life through the like a scene in a movie, right? The scene always has a situation. You know, the camera starts off and it has a planetary view, then it dives down through the atmosphere and through the clouds, and then all of a sudden the city comes in the view and it dives through the top of the building and it goes through every single layer and it comes into a studio where a young lady is sitting having a conversation with someone on the other side of the world. That's this situation. Right? And we can paint that situation with really colorful words. And then there's the action. There has to be action. A story is about a moment in time where something happens. If not, then it's just a listing of dates and times and events. But when you really drill down and look at it, and what is that moment in time? If we look at the seminal moment story, there's several moments in time where something happens, but the true moment in time in that story is when the teacher takes my hand and walks me to the one classroom and to the next classroom, because I take that moment in time and I bring it back into the meaning. All right, when somebody believes in you, they will take you by the hand and show you the way. So your story needs to have that action piece. Something has to happen. And then the story needs to have the resolution. As a result of this action, this is what ended up happening. This is the resolution to it. And then the M, which is the message, the meaning, or the modification, that's where you get to really attach your own piece to it, your own meaning to it. Because that story that I shared about the seminal moment can have completely different meanings for you, or it could have a different meaning depending on the audience that I'm speaking with. But when I attach a meaning to it, I'm actually taking you from your limbic mind and I'm attaching it to your logical mind, your neocortex. And once I'm able to make those two anchor points, that's what makes that story memorable. The other pieces make it specific and concise. And I want to take a moment and talk about the limbic mind. Let's get a little bit of neuroscience here, because the limbic mind is this tiny little place, and it actually sits right about the middle of your brain housing group. Right? It's also known as the third eye. And in the limbic mind, there are no words. There's no language. There's a thing that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. There's just memories, emotions, and feelings and experiences. That's all that is there. It is the movie track of our lives. And when we put ourselves into a state of practice of looking back there and doing recall, we're actually doing a little bit of massage to the limbic mind. And the more that we do this, the stronger that it becomes. So when we're telling a story, and this is a key element to telling a story, when we tell a story, we tell it in real time. If you notice, I mentioned for both the seminal moment and also the unintentional audience abuse story, I say, I am standing. I am standing in front of a door. I am standing in front of an audience. It is a present moment thing. And that little piece of it allows the listener to also be standing. They are now standing, as opposed to saying, I was standing. That's a past thing. I'm looking at it through binoculars as it's something in the past. But if I say, I am doing this, and in the story, you as the listener, you are also standing in that moment. So telling a story in real time allows that person to be there. And here's the wild thing. Here's the voodoo with the limbic mind. And it's happened here today already. It happens all the time. As I'm telling my story of the 4th grade, you are standing there going through all these things. I'm actually imprinting a memory, my memory, into your mind, into your limbic mind, to where my memory is now your memory. And that is really the power of stories. I am, without you you're allowing me because you have me here, and all the listeners are here free of will as well, but I'm able to imprint that and leave that with you. And that's how I become memorable.
Yes, sorry, Keith. I was just thinking that when you were talking about you studying in front of of an audience when you're in 4th grade, I could literally picture you being this kid, and wearing the outfit. So yes, you did imprint something of you.
That's the voodoo, right? And when we look at the great leaders of the world and the people that are really impactful in our lives, they've left those kinds of imprints on our limbic mind.
Fantastic. So with that imprint now, what are the other, like how you're going to bake a cake, right? You need to know the recipe.
Yeah.
So the recipe of good storytelling. Now, I know that you have gamified this approach with a game called With One Word.
Yes.
So can you just go a little deep into it and then tell us how you do it, and so that a person who is shy about even, just opening up their lives and saying, I've got a story to tell, how can they do it and do it right?
So let's jump into the gamified approach to storytelling.
Okay.
The reason why I've always loved games, I've always played games, and what's the thing about games is games are fun. Games put people into a state of play. And when we're in a state of play, our limbic mind is very, very active. It's a very creative place, because there's so many other things that are in and around the limbic mind, that when you're in a state of play, you're in a state of creativity, and it's a high functioning area. When we stress out, that's the part of the brain that shuts down, and we go into fight or flight. And that's what tends to happen when it's like, oh, you're going to get up in front of a group of people and give a presentation. Like, mind instantly shuts down, fight or flight. I'm nervous. I can't do this, right? Like all these things, all these stresses come in. So by making it a game, it relaxes everybody. And the way that the With One Word storified game approach works is, what we want to do is we'll use a trigger word, and we'll play one right now. And everybody that's listened to this, or you listen to this later, you have a chance to play this game, because your mind will automatically play it. This was the really fun thing also, whether you want to or not, your mind's about to play this game, because I give verbal cues that lead you down a path to looking at a memory. And it's a memory you haven't thought of in a while. Well, probably because of this podcast, you have thought of it a little bit. But the way that it works is the game is with one word, first, best, last, worst. So I'm going to give you a trigger word, and then I want you to think about your first experience, your best experience, your last experience, and your worst experience. And know this to be true about stories. What's terrible for you is great for the story. So your one word is teacher. So who was your first teacher? And don't overanalyze this, like, oh, I have to be, exactly correct. It's the first one that pops into your head. Who was your best teacher, your last teacher, and then your worst teacher? Once you have those names, then the story that you're going to share, and at least I'm going to ask you to share a story with me here in just a moment, will self-select when I say this next thing. A story is about a moment in time where something happens. So with one of those teachers you thought of, what is a moment in time where something happens? Do you see it?
Yes, I do.
I want you to go back there. I want you to just immerse yourself. Just let it wash over you. Where are you? What's happening? What's the situation? What is the moment in time? What happens as a result of that moment in time? And what does it mean to you today? And an important thing about storytelling also is that a good story is a short story. The longer the story, the more difficult it is to tell. So tell a short story. So give us the high points of this story. What you got? Your listeners want to know.
Yeah. So I was there in I think I was probably about 9 years old. In primary, that's what we call our school system here, primary school. And I had this teacher who was very modestly dressed, and she is one Saleha. She said something about dressing up and doing makeups. It's a all female school. And she said something about, I dress up for my husband, even if it's just at home. And I don't usually make up when I go out, but I just make up for him at home. And I thought, wow. And what it dawned on me is that it's just, two people making each other happy. So it was her way of making her husband happy. And it worked very well for their marriage. And yes, so that came back to mind when you say, what was the best story that you had about just that moment, and somehow it flashed you. I'm sure if I have to go in depth, probably a lot more stories would come up, but that just flashed through my mind.
So that's the power of with one word is, and this happens to us constantly, is even through this conversation we've had, our listeners and you and I, like our minds jump to experiences and to memories, and we fill those gaps in. Is this happens in everyday conversation. And what the reason you need to put yourself into a state of practice is that's a good story. That's your first telling of that story. It's not polished, it's not clean, it's really not as tight as it can be. But here's the important thing. We searched for a story, we shaped it in our mind's eye, and then you did what is pivotal to being a storyteller. You told the story out loud. There is a tendency for business professionals, and I used to be guilty of this also, is I would search for that story, I'd shape it, and then I'd start to write the story out. And here's the thing with that is writing for reading and writing for speaking are on opposite sides of the same communication coin. They're both designed to convey information and a message and a meaning. Right? But when we write, we craft words, we shape them, we make sentences and paragraphs. And well, if you're going to start writing, you're going to become an author, because the way that we write and the way that we speak are completely different. And this is the flaw that most people have. This is the part where you end up really hamstringing yourself, is you write that story out. Written, it is beautiful. Oh my God, it's a work of art. But then you try to memorize it. And now you have these words memorized, and you stand up in front of your audience and you kind of glass over as your monoprocessor, your mind, which can only focus on one thing, switches over into the script, and you just start to repeat it, and try to hit all those words that are so important to you. Yet one of the most powerful things in speaking is to be present in the moment, to be there with the audience, and to really connect with them. And then when we regurgitate something that we've memorized, we're not there, right? There's like this sentient being that shows up that just hit the button and it starts to speak. And heaven forbid, you forget your place. Then all of a sudden you get this panic look on your face, like, oh my God, I'm not saying all the words perfectly. The story the two stories I've shared with you, I tell them different every single time. But the important thing is I tell the story. And I've given myself the permission, and this is a huge part for our entire audience, is don't put so much stress upon you. Don't think that the story has to be perfect, because you telling it from an authentic place is what makes it perfect. It's what makes that story original. You telling that story as a reliving of the experience, because as I tell both my stories, all I'm really doing is I'm telling you the movie scene as it's playing in my mind, right? It's like if we're watching I don't know why this popped up, right? Game of Thrones. I've never watched Game of Thrones, but if we were to watch Game of Thrones and I was on a phone with you and I would start telling you what's happening in the movie while you're not watching it, that's what this feels like. I recall the situation and I just hit on the little highlights and I bring those forth. So when you tell a story and you become a storyteller and you have to give a presentation, practice is key. Tell the story to anybody. Tell it to your dog, to your mom, to your dad, to your kids, to your neighbor. Tell it to a tree, to a plant, anybody who will listen. Because that's how we get the story to become better. That's how we reshape. As soon as I tell that story, like for you, Lisa, you've already thought of a better way to tell that story, haven't you? The one about your teacher. And it's because you heard yourself telling the story. And as you're saying it, like, I could say this better. And your mind automatically starts to reshape that memory. So the more we reshape it and reshare it, the more polished that story becomes.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I just want to put this caveat in. The reason I brought up about Puan Saleha is because she's so uniquely her, and she stood by it, her own values, and that's what I respected about her. So I just want to come back to the recipes of storytelling, Keith. And you mentioned, okay, so we have that one word, and if let's say we pick the word, say for example, it's pet, and you have your first pet, your best pet, your last pet, and your worst pet, right? So beyond that, anything else that kind of like needs to be in there so that you really draw at the heartstrings of the person that you're talking to?
Yeah, you're talking about the sticky story elements, the ones that really make the story pop. There's first person, telling stories with an evergreen time is a gift to the listener. As opposed to saying 5 years ago, I was doing this, this, and this. Well, when I say 5 years, your mind automatically leaves me and does the math to go back 5 years to find out what the date is. So instead say the year is 2016. And even better yet, it's the fall of 2016. The fall piece in there gives a time of year that has a feeling for you. While you are in a tropical place, the fall feels different to you than it does to me here in Colorado, where it's snowing currently. But that still gives you a feeling. Whether it's snowing here at the moment and not there is irrelevant. It gives you a feeling. So that's one. Another part of a story is give some details. Colors. What color was the outfit that I was wearing in my seminal moment story?
Pumpkin yellow.
Pumpkin yellow shorts. I was wearing a purple top. So I give you a couple of colors. Colors are huge. So speaking to the senses. The other part that I didn't have in this story, like you don't have to have all of these, but dialogue is great. Having a couple of characters, like in the story that I shared, I really painted out Mrs. Merrick. In the professional story, I only talked about the president. I didn't give him a name because to protect the innocent, right? We need to be careful when we tell a story about a moment in time that wasn't necessarily great for somebody else, we want to protect them. Even though the likelihood of the listeners here finding out who that is limited, we still want to protect the innocent. So leaving their names out, but names are important. So I could change his name to something else. So building a character in there, and then having a dialogue, having a little bit of a conversation back and forth. Like in the story that I told about a seminal, I could put words in Mrs. Merrick's mouth. Now here's the thing that is a wonderful thing about that you can do, because it's your story. I don't remember what Mrs. Merrick said to me, but I do know that she has said many things to me, and people have had conversations with me. And in that moment, right, I could create a dialogue that Mrs. Merrick and I had, right? It could be something along the lines of, Keith, that was such a wonderful book report. Would you like to share it with another class? And I would have said, oh, Miss Merrick, no, that's fine. She's like, I think everybody needs to hear this story. Okay, how about we go see your third grade teacher, Mrs. Huddleston? I'm like, Miss Merrick, yes, sure, not a problem at all. Because I'm still a fourth grader, right? That little bit of dialogue creates a richness and a texture to the story itself. So those are just some of the simple things you can add to a story to just enrich it and make it a little bit more sticky.
Okay. And so the whole objective here of storytelling is that people know it, like it, and then trust you. Is that the outcome that you're looking for? So because
Yes.
it's to build that connection, build that trust. And so the value of what that story means to you, it has to be in there, right? Part of the recipe.
Yeah, and you have the message is an incredibly important part, and that's what building relationships is about, is for people to get to know, like, and trust you. That's why you get hired in that job interview. That's how it is that you can. That's how you build relationships, right, with the people that are close to you. They know you, they like you, and they trust you. So it's the story that allows that to happen, and it has that really off-putting word for most business professionals. It has vulnerability in it. I shared something very personal about the fact that in fourth grade, I wore a purple outfit. I open myself up for the same thing that happened to me back then, a bit of ridicule. But I'm older now, and I really don't care. I want you to know that. Yes. Go ahead.
That's the beauty of it, I think, when you're able to be vulnerable, because that's the part that hits it, right? That people share that low moment. They really feel you. There's connection, there's empathy, or whatever it is. And being able to say to someone, yeah, I was ridiculed, I was laughed at. And I'm sure a lot of people actually have sometimes challenge with that.
Mhm.
What's with you and coaching your coachees, Keith? Do you find this often?
Absolutely. I find this all the time. Is one of the biggest things, like nothing exciting has ever happened to me. And then when we bring those things up, you're like, well, I'm a little embarrassed about that. It's like, yeah, anybody would be. And if you share that with somebody else, they're going to empathize with you, unless they're socially inept and they don't have any empathy whatsoever. They're not going to understand. But the majority of the people, they need to hear those things. And when we look at speaking and presenting from a stage, this is the thing that I coach my clients on. The audience wants one thing and one thing only. They want the speaker to win. They want the person on that stage to succeed. And the reason they want that is because they picture themselves there, and it is frightening and it is daunting. You are a hero. You are stepping up in front of most people's greatest fears in the world, and you are conquering those fears. And they look at you, and all they want for you is to just win. You can do this, which is why it turns into audience abuse when you don't do that, where you don't give them what it is that they really want. And they want to know why this is important to you. They want to know how it is that they can apply it. What does it mean to them today? And what action can I take in order to live my best life?
Very nice. So Anne asked this question, Keith. Her question is, how about adding a scent in your storytelling?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Like if we look at, like, it's fall and the leaves are changing and the smell of winter is in the air. Speak to all the senses. It's yes. Yeah, speak to all the senses. Anything you can do to really let that person sense and feel that moment. But here's the thing to keep in mind also is less is more. So hit upon a few of the senses. Don't hit them all. Because as you tell a story, you don't have to hit every single exact detail. Like I didn't go into too much detail of the school that I was in, because your mind will fill in the gaps. Your mind will place you in your school and looking through your window. And the students, I didn't need to paint out the picture of the students, because your mind already fills those in with students that you have had in classes. And that's really a powerful part also, is by telling that story, you're filling in all the gaps. You're placing yourself in my shoes.
Absolutely. So with the story, do you have a long version and a short version that you practice over and over? So you do, okay.
I practiced that story in its components, and then I've practiced it time and time again. But I've shared this story so many times. I created this story probably 3 years ago, that I don't have to practice the story anymore, because I've told it so many times. I know the key points that I want to hit, which I think is an important thing to take into consideration, that if you're at a networking event, the listener may not want to listen to the entire story. Which is why you want to have just a few anecdotal pieces from the story, like with you, Lisa, in your story of your teacher, right? Somebody's talking about something about, let's make makeup. And you're like, it's really interesting. I had, when I was 9 years old, my teacher said, I wear makeup at home for my husband because it's important to the relationship. And that's what makeup means to me. It's important to the relationship. That's just a little anecdotal piece that you're able to share. You don't have to give the entire thing. In my story, I share a lot, right? This is how I lead my networking introduction. When people ask that very famous question, so what do you do? I start off with a why statement. I say, I believe that unintentional audience abuse is preventable. And that statement is very purposeful, because it creates intrigue, it creates interest. Like, what do you mean about that? And then I'm able to move on to the next part of that story, that conversation. I can give a little anecdote, right? I had a boss who did this, this, and this. That's why I now do this. So telling the story in one go is not always necessary, right? Just giving some teasers, right? Like an IMBD, it just gives the highlight reel. So just give a little bit of a teaser. And if somebody's like, Lisa, that's really interesting. Tell me more about your teacher. Like, what really happened? If the listener is interested, they'll have you go deep. which is a very powerful thing when we look at in networking, right? Networking happens everywhere. You don't have to go to an event to be networking if we take on the mindset of all the world is a stage. So in a networking event, sharing just small anecdotal pieces of stories and things that have happened, and allowing that person to then come back and inquire and ask more questions, which for most people that are introverted, your superpower in networking is your ability to listen. And listening to understand is way stronger than being a prolific talker.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you so much, Keith. So I know that from just talking to you and throughout this conversation is gathering the bits that are, you've got to craft. You've got to craft in some ways your topics to just inspire or stimulate, people's curiosity. And that brings that, it's strategic, it's purposeful. So I like that part, and practicing. So I suppose when you have a good story is to practice with some other person and to find out if it's really an interesting story, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the story all the stories that I've shared, I crowdsource. I'll tell a part of the story that I'll ask the person, like, so what do you think of that? What does that mean to you? And it's really the input and influences of other people, and also telling the story and watching reactions that allow you to shape that story. It takes the story you tell the first time, it's never good. It's never good. The first story is never good. That's why you need to tell it again and again and again. It's about 16 times is where it really starts to take a really good shape.
Yes, thank you. So for people out there, watching, if you are at a networking event and, you're going to talking about the weather and then thinking about what's my next topic, it's again, be really crafty, be really, I suppose, creative, to find something that would interest the audience, but practice, have that in place.
Yeah.
Keith, so I know that people in the audience, if let's say they would love to connect with you, beyond the show, what's the best place in terms of what's your most active social media platform?
It's interesting. After watching The Social Dilemma, I deleted everything off of my phone because I was rabbit holing, and the only place that I really spend a lot of time is on LinkedIn. It's a professional networking platform where we're able to have professional conversations, and for me that's where you'll find me, is on LinkedIn. Okay. And I believe that you guys have my my LinkedIn profile, so if you want to share that with everybody, please do. And if you've got questions, I love what I do for the main reasons because I love other people's stories. I love telling stories, but what I really love is other people's stories.
Yes, I can totally understand, because I love a good story too. And I love listening to stories. So you can find Keith at this website, which belongs to him. He's the founder of articulated-intelligence.com. So thank you so much, Keith, for spending this hour with us. And one thing I've learned from you is that to be specific, be concise, make that story short. You can have a long version and also be memorable.
Yeah, add that meaning to it. What does it mean to you today? And it can change depending on the audience you're connecting with.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Once again, it's early morning for Keith in Denver. It's about 6 a.m. now. So have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
About that. And thank you so much for waking up early for our show. And to everyone, thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us. This show is brought to you by Leaderonomics and Opeaklife. I'm Lisa Wong. It's been an honor serving you. And I'd like to thank my producers, Shasi, and the team. And guys, be fulfilled, live a purposeful life, and see you next time. Goodbye.